And then he started doing, the album cover artwork. He did, the Bats album cover and, some of the compilation stuff. Yeah, but that was something that you could sort of see developing as the scene developed, and his artwork got, really complex and really intense.
I was telling you about those flyers, like back in the early 80s, it wasn't like, here you go out, everybody gives you flyers. Yeah. Well, there just were not that many shows in San Diego, especially at that time, and his name was on the corner, Mad Mark Rude, of pretty much most of them. I had them all over my closet, and in every corner was a Mad Mark Rude. Like, I did this great one for the Cramps. I wish I had it still, of this old woman, and it was I still visually can picture a flyer, and we're talking flyers from the early 80s that are stuck in my brain that I grew up having on my walls that I still remember. Who remembers what a flyer looked like, for crying out loud, And I remember this shit.
If he, if he endorsed a show by, putting his work on the flyer, then that meant that you better get your ass down there.
There was a lot of times when we'd all be sitting out in the other room listening to records and drinking, and he was back in his back room just, working away and wanted to get stuff done. The Misfits album cover, I wasn't there a lot when he was working on it, but I went with him the night we drove to give it to them. And I just remember feeling so proud that I was with him when he was handing it over to them. And I remember when he gave it to them, and they were happy, definitely. They thought it was pretty cool. But I don't think they understood how many hours that man spent doing that. That was just an incredible amount of time put into that cover. And it was just an amazing piece of art. I felt really cool to be there in that moment when he handed it over to him. He was one that would always include everybody in everything good or bad that happened in his life. He was very big on including everybody on what was going on in his life. I always felt like part of everything that he did. Even though I was just hanging around his house or whatever I was doing, I always felt like he made me feel like I was important in the accomplishment. That, it was really a good thing that he did for people.
I came up with the idea to do Fucked Up and Photocopied, which was just all punk art, flyers, photos, and stories from, the sort of pioneers of punk from the U.S., from New York to San Francisco, L.A., Dallas, Detroit. And it's all mostly geared around art, but stories and photographs as well from the pioneering bands and the pioneering sort of people. And I instantly knew that I had to talk to Mark, and he was one of the first people that I had called. It took me a while to find him, but I did find him, and I guess when I called him, it had just he had just come back from New York, or he was just about to come. I think that was it. I found him in New York, and he was coming back. And so I said, well, we need to hook up because I need to show you, what I'm doing. And, it took me another little while to figure out where he was. But once I found him, I just brought over just flyers and stuff I had found and stuff I wanted him to say, did you do this? And, and he was so impressed with what I was doing and that it was real. And he definitely had that sort of aw shucks, proud of you sort of vibe, because he was like, you're really doing this. And it's like, yeah, man, I've been doing it for 2 years. That he just whipped out all the originals and just handed me everything he had, originals, and said, just use whatever you want. I'll write you a story and, show me what it looks like in the end.
I guess in the Black Dahlia book that he did, there are some pictures of his father in there, and I guess one of them was he drew a picture of his dad in drag, which was pretty interesting. It's like, I wonder what was going on in Mark's mind about that. And what's really neat, artwork for him was obviously very, very personal. It wasn't just like, oh, here, I think somebody will buy this, or I think this is the modern trend. His artwork was his style, and he didn't he didn't compromise his style over the times. That's what he did. And I think it started out coming from the heart. I think when he died, it was still coming from the heart. I think his artwork was still very personal, and he would interject his personal outlooks and things that he was into his artwork of that time. Even if it was a contracted piece of art for a book or for a band, you could still tell it went deeper than just whatever image was at face value. It's like, this is something that's intriguing Mark right now, or this is something that's whispering in his ear. It's something that's very much in his mind. It would always get out. I think for him, his artwork was very therapeutic per se. It's just him getting out whatever was inside and whatever was in his mind.
He was just seeing what kind of artwork I had done and stuff, and he seemed like the friendliest guy, man. He was like the coolest, like mellowest kind of guy and stuff, and he was like seemed really intellectual and stuff, and just the the kindest, nicest guy. And I started talking to him about collaborating on something, a little project like a Woody Woodpecker head, the Woody Woodpecker smoking a cigar. And I started drawing this thing, and as soon as I got a little bit too close to Mark, he said like, "Hey, don't be too palsy wells or something like that."
Telling me that.
Yeah.
What do you mean being too close to him?
I just wanted to do something, a little collaboration or something, something, kind of on, a cooperative, art bonding way, and it was just, as soon as I brought it up and he started talking about it a little bit, I realized that he was not the kind of guy to do things other than solo type of experiences in art, art projects.
What did he do? How did he impress that on you? What was the?
Well, I remember we were standing over the drawing table. I was showing him this picture of Woody Woodpecker. It was in blue pencil, and he was starting to kind of stand over the table and stuff. But he just didn't want to get too close. He was just backed off and said, forget, I'm not trying to be your buddy or something. Something crude,
Yeah, he knew his shit. I mean, you could tell that Mark knew what he was talking about with art, or he was, pretty passionate about it, really. And, from that point on, I remembered his name, and I remembered, who he was, and I would see his art, and I'd really notice it then. Plus, he had a similar style to me. I was an ink artist at the time. We were both punk rock artists. There wasn't a lot of them, and then after that, I started running into him here and there at shows and things. And in LA, yeah, in LA. I didn't spend too much time in San Diego, but after he came up here, I would see him around,
So 84?
Yeah, right, probably around that time period, I'm really bad with time just because of, the alcohol and drugs, probably. But I always respected Mark, and he was showing around different places I would show around and stuff like that. And I always wanted to get him involved in one of my projects. But I did the serial killer cards, and I started working on those in '89, and those made a huge stink. Of course, the media took off of that stuff. And then the following set that followed up that card set was a set I did called The World's Most Hated People. And in that card set, I brought in 11 different artists to work on it besides myself. And I wanted Mark to be part of that set, so he did a handful of cards for that. It was about people that you would hate, Mark did. Well, let's see, Mark did. He did the Lee Harvey Oswald card was one of the guys in the hated cards. He did David Duke, Tipper Gore. So those are the three he did out of the set. I let the artists pick who they wanted to do because we had a list of names, Oh, I know he wanted to do Tipper Gore just because of the, the whole attack on music and everything. So of course that fit him to a T,
When I was 18 years old, I got introduced to the world of art rock, and spent a lot of time doing artwork for bands like Motley Crue and things like that. So I got kind of drug into doing hard rock stuff when my heart wasn't really there. And I met people in San Diego that were more my cup of tea, and on the punk rock side, when I was turned onto that style of artwork that it was an art movement that I didn't know existed, simply because I was involved with the music scene that I was, and then being exposed to what punk rock really was. And what I found was that Marc Rude was punk rock. And for me, being like on one side of the fence and being fairly popular for doing that, and then being over here with this like absolutely beautiful, well-rendered artwork with a real attitude juxtaposed to what I really did, it was something that I completely envied. I was probably making more money over here, but over here was somebody that I completely envied. And I really found myself collecting things that Marc did, and trying to emulate just even flyers, things. At the time, I was being paid to paint, and I'd look at Marc's just black and whites, and at the time I wasn't even completely like interested in learning how to like make my ink style better. And for the very first time in my life, I learned how to stipple. And stipple is the dot process. That's been around forever. It's not, it's nothing new to the art world.
Right.
But I learned from Marc Rude, and I used to sit there and emulate. When he would bring the posters in, I'd look at him, go like, "Fuck, this is what I should be doing." And to this day, when I do a black and white, I still go right back to Marc. And I try to emulate Marc, and I try to better Marc. That's the limit I set for myself, is I look at what Marc did, and I try to be better than Marc. That's my bar.
You heard about the fights and
Well, Marc Rude, I don't want to get off on the wrong foot here, but I got along with Marc Rude and I liked Marc. But Marc followed the punk rock philosophy of violence, and that was kind of a touchy thing on me, because I'm more comfortable with people that I can talk freely with instead of worrying about having my ass pounded in the ground. I liked Marc. Marc was a very talented fella, and now Marc is, I guess unfortunately, prematurely joined his peer group. Oh, he had a certain respect for me. I don't mean to be unhumble. I don't want to violate my humility here, but he treated me as an elder statesman, and had respect for me.
Cash was originally the contemporary artist space of Hollywood. I saw them filming an episode of Chips. And they have these people who have got hair like mine, but it's all pushed up, like mega, sprayed blue, dog collars, way too big of a chain for anybody to carry around, and biker boots and this whole thing. I was like, oh, brother, is that stupid? And I was with a whole bunch of punks that I was hanging with. So I went up to somebody on the set, and I go, this is all wrong. Who's responsible for bringing these people here? And they gave me a name of a company. So I went to this company and I said, if you're going to do punk rock, I'll give you punk rock. I automatically became the punk rock extras, the punk rock talent, whatever person for the movies. Marc Rude became, and that's how we actually really got to know each other well, in addition to the fact that he moved into the building I used to live in. Marc became one of my great employees.
Janet had like all the real punks and bikers and cholos and stuff like that, and people would like, you know, she started this agency, and then like people would hire like a bunch of people from Central Casting or something, and then they'd hire a couple of Janets for a shoot, and then the next day all the Central Casting people would be like sent home because they would want to use the real people, you know, but then then the real people were always like drinking on the set or really like getting into fights or like passing out because they were so hungover from the night before. But I mean, visual wise, it was completely worth it. You know, like you get a punk from Central Casting that would have like a fake mohawk or like brand new pants with like one zipper in them, and then someone like Marc would show up, and it's like, who are you gonna pick? You know, someone that's covered in tattoos and like, you know, bloodshot with like 80 earrings and like ripped up Levi's, or like some nerd that looks like an escapee from Days of Our Lives.
The thing with the Janet Cunningham, with those things, is you get a little voucher. You'd walk in and you'd get a voucher, and you have to hold on to that during the day, and at the end you turned it in. And Janet was the meal ticket. Besides being a nice lady, you didn't want to piss her off, you know. Right. Janet got me through some hard times, and I don't know what I would have had to do, done some crimes if it had not been for her.
Being responsible to have anywhere from 20 to 500 punks arrive at Paramount Studios or on a major film set, and then returning for 3 or 4 days, I can't even imagine how I did it. But some people were like extremely responsible, and they were not only responsible for themselves, and Marc Root is one of these people, but they also cheerleaded on other people to be responsible. So if you would meet Marc, and if you would see Marc, you would never know that he was just the ultimately dependable, organized guy who he would make sure that the 20 people like that were in the scene with him were all coming back. If he had to go pick them up, he'd bring them back. He had a really good sense of what it was about, but bigger than all that, he had a sense of it's a job. If you can be making $125 a day, drink beer, smoke pot, take acid, do heroin, whatever it was that everybody was doing, show up 3 or 4 days, you got $600, you've got your rent, and you've got your, whatever your habits are, paid for. There were other people where they would like show up and then like disappear because they weren't responsible.
Some old punk rock girl that we knew back then, and she was saying, yeah, Marc he's also been in movies, you know, and she rented this movie called Body Double, and there's a scene where in the movie they're filming a video of Frankie Goes to Hollywood, and he's marching down this nightclub, and there's all these punk rock people in leather and stuff, and he was just more or less an extra, but it was a pretty good part. You could see him, you know, and he had a lot longer hair, and he was fully leathered down, and he had some hot wench he was dancing with during that song, you know, and she goes, look, there he is right there, there's Marc Root. I'm like, wow.
He got paid extra.
Marc got paid. He got paid like $1,600, or he got residuals. He made money. It was great.
That's cool. And were you really watching him in the audience when he was doing this?
Yeah, I was half laughing because, okay, first of all, the makeup that they chose, like, was their idea of punk, but it was so cool. It was so Alice Cooper.
I got a call like at 8 o'clock at night, and they said, we need 200 people tomorrow, 7 a.m., for a Prince video, Raspberry Beret. And they had them all doing this one dance, Raspberry Beret. Everybody, because they only moved one leg and one arm like that. The next day, everybody was like crippled because for 12 hours they picked up one leg. And if you ever see this, and Marc is in it.
Oh my God, I totally messed up that whole choreography. It was me and him and Nikki Beat in the back.
You were in it?
Yeah, we were in it together. Like this choreographed scene to Raspberry Beret. And we were supposed to do like, you know, just, it was very minimal. We were supposed to all do these hand claps. And they had me kind of like up on this American bandstand, kind of like,
you know, pedestal. Like there was a few of those and there was a few girls on each one. And I was on mine and then everyone else was on the dance floor. And Mark somehow managed to make his way over to mine so he could be close. Like him and Nikki sort of like, you know, moved people around so they could be next to mine. And him and Nikki were so into this, like two white guys that like, you know, they were like really getting into like all the choreographed moves. It was so funny, you know, and they like had it down and they were into it and no, you got to do it this way. And
when he got dudes, and that's the thing, he always wanted to keep me up to date with these things, but when he got dudes, he was really serious and hoping that that would lead to like this film career, because at that point, this whole, that who he was becoming kind of accepted by the mainstream, at least to see in entertainment. Wasn't freaking people out anymore.
So we did this movie for Penelope Spheris called Dudes. And so he and Flea and I carpool for 2 weeks back and forth up there to Vasquez Rocks. And it's funny because I don't think any of us really were really great friends at that point. I mean, I knew Marc better than I knew Flea. But on the way up there, we didn't talk about music. We didn't talk about the Chili Peppers. We didn't talk about the Gears. We just talked about bullshit dude shit and how happy we were to be in a movie. And we all had visions of grandeur, I think. His parts, they used a lot of them because he was very aggressive, very intimidating, which is what they were trying to go. We were the gang. We were the bad guys. And we come across Flea and his buddies who were the stars in this campground, and we fuck with them and we kill them. We kill Flea, I think, first, and the other two guys live and they track us down and kill us.
Yes, I was working as Aaron Latham's research assistant for an article that was in Rolling Stone magazine called The Zero Generation. The movie Perfect was based on a piece he had done for Rolling Stone. And so he was planning on doing something similar, finding another sort of lifestyle and writing a story about that could be made into a film. So there was this idea of doing something about the sort of the underground night scene, punk scene in LA. And he likes to, or he did like to, fashion the story around couples, you know, have romance involved. So he wanted to find like the quintessential punk rock underground LA couple. So I had to do this little search. I walk in, you know, he greets me, and it was the first time I'd met him, and he's just like covered in tattoos, and it was not that common at that time to just be massively covered in tattoos. And he had all the piercings and everything. Everybody else was sort of like piercing light and tattoo light. Marc was really pretty hardcore. And he was pretty good looking, and he really had like a strong sexual aura. He was very like macho and but soft at that same time, like that nice combination. And then he introduces me to Iris, and my Lord, she's beautiful. What a couple. There she is. She's got her raven hair and her red lips and some lovely little 50s kind of gingham outfit on with the high heels, and they were, this is it. These are stars in the making, you know. So we sat down and chatted for a couple of hours, and I liked them so much right away as people, as well as just thinking, what perfect casting. I've really come up with the goods, I know it, you know. So that was the beginning of our saga together with the Rolling Stone story. Aaron, I've got him. It's got to be these people. I don't want to meet anybody else. He said, before you do anything further, you know, writing up notes, doing more interviews, he said, I have a contract. I need their permission. It was because his goal from the beginning was to write this story and then do a film. The contracts were signed, and they signed their lives away for a couple $1,000 a piece. Set up specific times to interview them, alone together, and then join them in social situations. I just needed, my goal at first was to just really understand I wanted to know that their relationship was real, because there were many stories going around saying that, oh, they weren't authentic, you know, this was a new relationship. Well, in fact, it was, you know, and I realized that, but it didn't matter. Their feelings for each other were very real. So they used to have this LA downtown festival, and bands would play. It was really wonderful. And Lauren, Mark's son, had come up for the day, and I remember watching people watch them. Mark and Iris, they were freaks. Well, Mark and all his leathers, and you know of course, again, you'll hear over and over again from me and talking about his tattoos, because people really were, because it wasn't just a tattoo. It's, you know, he was covered. Of course, now people are covered on their faces. Maybe people would turn. Nobody would turn now, but it was different then. He was a pioneer for a look. You know, he really was. Even in the punk rock world, he was more punk rock than most of the guys in the bands. He had no desire to please society at large, but he had a great need to please the people he loved, and those people were usually outcasts and you know, people who didn't fit in.
You told me that he had some abusive relationships with women. Never with me. We never even had one argument. I guess that's another reason why our relationship is so sacred to me, because it was the first time I had a relationship that was almost perfect. I mean, as far as we didn't fight, he never called me a bad name, he never hit me. I think he would have killed anybody who did. Mm-hmm. He was a contradiction. He was, because everything he was, he wasn't. He was a badass, but he was the most sensitive guy you'd ever meet. He looked like he hadn't bathed in a month, but he smelled like Ivory soap. You know, his hair was all frizzed out here, but he spent an hour in the bathroom doing these little braids and teasing it or dyeing it or whatever he did. You know, everything he did was planned out, but to look like he just came that way. You know, he'd come off like he was just this, and then he'd sit down and read something like Tolstoy. I mean, he was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. But, you know, he did the best he could to disguise these things. You know, he'd sit there in his work, and he'd do his little art. That took forever to do his art. It took forever, all those little dots. You know, it would take hours and hours and hours. And he had all this patience. Drugs weren't our thing. I was never really into drugs, ever. It never was my big thing. Booze was never my big, you know, if I had any addiction, it was boys. I liked boys. I thought boys were cute and boys were nice, and that was what I was into. And Mark wasn't, I mean, he was into his music, he was into his art. He wasn't a big partier either. I mean, he had opportunity. I'm sure he did do it. I'm not saying he didn't. I'm sure he did. But when we got together, we were really kind of into each other and into what we were doing. And it was nice. I mean, the sex was good, but the domestic life was good too, because it was Mark's safe place. You know, only a few people had the number. John Toner had the phone number. Stephanie had the phone number. Lauren had the phone number. And that was it. So he could go there. Nobody knew where he was. He could get away, and people weren't going to bother him. You know, whether it was somebody showing up at his house, oh, let's party, or work, or anything else he had to do. Nobody could find him if he didn't want to be found. Maybe 10 months? From day one, he was there. He may have skipped a day here and there. Never for more than a couple of days ever did we go without seeing each other, ever. And then we were always on the phone. So I talked to him every day, at least, and I probably saw him 5 or 6 days a week, easy. Till he left.
Left to work.
To go to LA. forever. My son got very sick right after Mark left. He got very sick and he wouldn't eat at all. And he was, like I said, he was just a little over a year old. And, dang, he wasn't even a year old. Well, I guess he was, yeah, a little over a year old. And he got very sick, he wouldn't eat. I brought him to the hospital. I brought him to the doctor's office, who told me to take him straight to the hospital. And he didn't have a fever. They couldn't find anything wrong with him. He just wouldn't eat. And he had lost a couple pounds, and when you're just a baby, that's a lot. And so they kept him in the hospital, and they kept telling me they didn't know what was wrong with him, but they wouldn't release him to me. And I'm going, well, and they weren't sure if maybe it was something I was doing to him, or maybe I wasn't feeding, I mean, they didn't know what, since they couldn't find a cause for it. It wasn't like he was eating and throwing up or losing weight. He just wouldn't eat. They wanted to keep him in there till he gained some more weight. And Mark came in, and I was just hysterical. I didn't know what questions to ask. I just felt hopeless and scared because he was my only child. And, and Mark came in and kind of took control of the whole situation.
Mark find out?
I talked to him on the phone. I told him what happened, because we still talked all the time. We talked almost every day anyway, even when he first moved up there. And I told him what had happened, and I told him that if he tried to get a hold of me, I wouldn't be here, because I'd been pretty much living at the hospital out in Claremont in San Diego. And I remember I went outside, probably to smoke a cigarette, I don't know. I went outside, and Mark pulled up in a car with a bunch of people, and he got out, and they drove off. And I don't know how he made it there. I don't know who these people were. I never asked him. He just showed up. And he came in, and he took control of everything. He knew all the right things to ask. He'd ask the doctors. He got everything cleared up for me, because I'd start to talk to him, and they'd give me, these doctors would come off with these $50 words, and I just and Mark turned right around and slapped him right back at him. And I remember that was the first time I was really amazed at how bright he was, because and the doctors too, because they're looking at him, because he came in his full punk regalia, so he looked like some idiot off the street, and these doctors are all in there, and Mark just and at the end, they all had a respect for him. And he had everything straightened out, for me, as far as what was going on. I understood what was happening. And, we got everything together. And he stayed right there in that hospital with me, 24/7, for a day or two, maybe 2 days, I think.
This made you feel good.
Yeah, because I was scared. This was my baby. I mean, and I didn't know what was wrong with him. He didn't have a fever. There was nothing tangible. And I was just scared. I was never been scared like that in my life.
Was Mark sitting there with you?
The whole time. The whole time he stayed there with me.
I first met Mark in late 1982, 83, early 83, although I certainly knew who he was before I met him from his reputation.
What'd you hear?
He was the person to watch out for, because he was always involved in the fights, and, I'd seen the mosh pit with him with his belt out, smacking people.
What year is this?
I knew that from the late 70s, early 80s. And he was someone to watch out for, especially if you were on the fringe of things and weren't in the hardcore group of, his friends. And then at some point, my friend Jennifer got interested in him and, introduced me to him as a person. And first I was like, what are you doing hanging out with him? Don't you know, blah, 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 his reputation and all that. And she said, oh no, he's really smart, and he's really interesting. And so she introduced me to him, and she was right. He was really smart and really interesting. But he still had that bad side, that reputation. When my friend Jennifer started dating Mark, then, I was a constant companion, good friend of hers, so I got, introduced to him through her, and we started talking and got to know each other, and it turned out I needed a place to live, and Mark needed a roommate, so the two worlds kind of came together. In fact, Mark was starting to expand because he had been, this hardcore punk rock, known for this bad reputation and violence, which was true and justified, but at the same time he had these desires to create more and to use his art, his rapidograph drawings, and he was kind of stuck in this job at NASCO, at shipbuilding, which he didn't like, and wanted to break out of that. And I think he realized to kind of put together this underground society, you needed more diversity and you needed more different kinds of people than just the hardcore people that he was with at the time. And by meeting me and my friends, I think he saw that there were a lot of other people that were into the same kind of, you know, like music, art, alternative culture scene that could be a part of that. So I moved into Marc's place on 15th Street in downtown San Diego near City College. And so I had my own room, and it was a fun house. There were people over all the time, and it was wildly decorated. It was funny because it was behind the Socialist bookstore. There were two houses on this lot, and so the Socialist bookstore up front had all the hippie people coming with driving their Volvos and having their meetings, and then Marc's punk rock house was behind. And you know, there were medical charts on the wall, and like rubber masks and monsters, and there was this burned up bass guitar that I think was from the Misfits hanging on the wall, and you know, just hundreds of albums.
So into a time, you remember? He was pretty into all, like a lot, he wasn't just punk, I mean he would listen to...
Yeah, you know, Marc loved music, and he listened to lots of stuff. The edgier, the better. I remember like the Virgin Prunes and Southern Death Cult, of course, Joy Division and New Order. And at that time also, you know, music was really changing. It was kind of the post-punk thing, and there was a lot more like dance-oriented music. And in San Diego, Club ID was a big thing. That was Trevor and Lynn's club. That was every kind of, I mean, all kinds of music. I mean, mostly like British imports. And it was a really eclectic crowd of people. I mean, everyone was there from rockabilly to punk rock to, you know, like kind of power pop, new romantic, you know, all the little cliches of the time. But it was the main scene, and it was on Monday nights, and that's where everybody went. It was very fun. I remember one incident with Marc that was really great. There were we met these people from England. They were from Newcastle, way up in the north, and they were like these hippie punk rock Vikings. And there was this guy, Ray, who had like totally ratted out hair, like ratted out bleach blonde hair, and he had these like fur boots and like a vest and lots of like punk rock accoutrement mixed up with this like Viking stuff. It was really great. And I remember Marc, he was wearing his leathers and like his leather coat or Levi vest or whatever. And they were standing at the bar, and Marc looks at Ray and goes, 5 years ago, I used to look like that. And Ray looks at Marc and goes, 5 years ago, I used to look like that. And I just thought it was great. It just showed how, you know, people evolve through their culture and their style, and we're really all just together.